Chapter 1. The Kingdom of Flame. In the heart of a world that thrived on eternal fire, the kingdom of Infernus stood as a blazing testament to the power of the Fire King and his queen. Its mountains smoldered, and rivers of lava flowed as blood through the land, feeding the ever-growing empire. The air was thick with heat and the scent of burning ash, and the skies were streaked with fiery orange hues as if the very heavens were aflame. Kyle, the Fire King, sat upon a throne forged from blackened obsidian and adorned with ruby-like gems that gleamed like the sun itself. His presence was commanding, his chest rising and falling with the weight of authority. The air around him shimmered, bending from the intensity of the heat he emitted. His piercing amber eyes surveyed his kingdom, ever watchful, ever calculating. He was not a man of words, but of action. His reign had been one of conquest and strength. His very name whispered with both awe and fear across distant lands. Beside him, Queen Nera stood like the flame that ignited the inferno. Her presence alone seemed to set the very air alight. Clad in crimson and black armor that hugged her fierce, athletic form, she was a vision of strength and beauty intertwined. Her eyes, glowing like molten lava, never wavered as she surveyed the room. Her beauty was unrivaled, but it was her strength and sharp mind that had earned her place at Kale's side. She was not a mere queen. She was a warrior, a force of nature, the embodiment of the fire they both ruled. Kale. Nera's voice broke the silence, rich and commanding. There are whispers in the northern territories. The rebels have grown bolder. They seek to challenge your rule. Kyle's gaze hardened, his fingers tightening around the obsidian staff that he always carried. Let them come, he rumbled, his voice low and filled with fire. They will learn the consequences of defying me. Nyra stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with unwavering certainty. We have always met rebellion with swift retribution, but this time we must prepare. They are rallying the discontented, stirring unrest in the heart of the kingdom. They believe they can take what belongs to us. Kale's lips curled into a smile, though it was devoid of humor. Let them try, he said, his voice like the roar of a furnace. They will learn that nothing stands in the way of the flames. But Nera wasn't so sure. She had seen the growing unrest for herself, heard the murmurs in the halls of power. While Kyle ruled with fire and fury, Nera knew that a kingdom built on fear alone would eventually burn itself to the ground. The fire that had forged them, that had given them power, could just as easily consume them. We need to do more than just burn them down. Nera spoke again, her voice calm yet resolute. We need to show them that we are more than fire. We are the foundation of this world, the flame that gives life to everything it touches. Kyle turned to her, his gaze softening for a moment. And what do you suggest, my queen? Nera took a deep breath. We do not just strike at them in the dark of night. We challenge them openly, show them our strength, and then offer them something they cannot refuse. A choice. Join us, or be reduced to ash. We will show them that the fire can both burn and warm. We will offer them redemption in our rule. Kyle studied her for a long moment, his fiery gaze searching her face. Then he nodded slowly. Your wisdom is unmatched, my queen. We will do as you say. As the sun began to set, casting a blood-red glow over the kingdom, Kale and Nera made their way to the heart of the palace. The grand hall was lit with blazing torches casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The royal council had gathered, warriors, generals, and advisers who had sworn loyalty to the Fire King. "The time has come to put an end to this rebellion," Kael announced, his voice thunderous. "But we will not destroy them in the shadows. We will face them openly, and we will give them a choice. Surrender or burn." The council was silent, the weight of Kael's words hanging in the air. They knew their king well. He was a man of few words. But when he spoke, it was law. His will was the law of fire, and none could stand against it. But now there was something new in his voice, a hint of strategy, of a deeper purpose behind his words. Nira stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the gathered leaders. "We must show the people that we are not just rulers, but the foundation of their world," she said. "We will not be conquered by fire alone. We will conquer with wisdom, with strength, and with unity." Her words rang out, clear and commanding, and the council members bowed their heads in acknowledgement. They had seen the power of the Fire King and his queen, and they knew that no force, no rebellion, could stand against the united power of flame and will. That night, the fires of battle began to stir. The rebels, unaware of the king's true intentions, had no idea what they were about to face. The flames of war were not just burning, they were being forged into something greater, something that would reshape the future of the kingdom. The Fire King and his queen stood together, ready to face the rebellion that threatened their empire. They were not just rulers of fire. They were the keepers of an inferno that could not be quenched, the fire that would consume all who dared to challenge their rule. And as the first battle cries echoed through the land, Kael and Nira stood side by side, their eyes alight with the promise of victory. The flames of war had been kindled, and the kingdom of Inferna would never be the same. Chapter 2. The Flames of War. The morning after the council's decision, the kingdom of Inferna was alive with the sound of preparation. Soldiers drilled in the courtyards, weapons clashing as they honed their skills, while blacksmiths and artisans worked tirelessly to reinforce the armor and create new weapons. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy, the tension thick like smoke rising from the ever-burning fires that surrounded the city. Kael stood at the heart of the training grounds, his broad chest rising and falling with each steady breath. His fiery gaze watched over the men and women who fought under his banner, his warriors whose loyalty to him was as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded the kingdom. His people feared him, respected him, and loved him. Yet, in this moment, Kael felt the weight of the upcoming battle pressing upon him. The rebellion was no small threat. It was an uprising that could either strengthen his rule or shatter the kingdom to its very core. Beside him, Nira stood as always, her fiery gaze scanning the ranks of soldiers, her expression one of calm control. She had never feared battle, nor had she ever faltered in the face of war. To her, it was a natural extension of the world, like the fire that ran through her veins. She could see the worry in Kael's eyes, the ever-present weight of leadership. She knew that he bore the burden of a ruler who was determined to protect his kingdom at any cost. "Do you ever doubt our path?" Kael asked her quietly, his voice low, almost hesitant. Nira turned to him, her amber eyes reflecting the molten glow of the fires in the distance. "Doubt is for the weak," she said, her voice firm. "We have never faltered in the face of adversity. We will not start now." She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath his armor. You were born to rule, Kyle. This kingdom thrives because of your strength and vision. The rebellion is a challenge, but one that will ultimately strengthen us. Kyle met her gaze, his lips curling into a rare smile. He knew that she was right. Nera was not just his queen. She was his equal in every way, his partner in both love and war. Together they had faced every challenge the kingdom had thrown at them, and together they would face this rebellion head on. We fight for our kingdom, Kyle said, his voice growing stronger. We fight for our people, and we will not let anyone tear this empire apart. As they spoke, a rider galloped up to them, dust rising from the dirt roads as the horse's hooves pounded against the earth. The rider dismounted quickly, bowing before Kale and Nera with a sense of urgency. Your Majesties, the rider said, panting for breath, the rebels have begun to rally in the north. They've gathered more than we expected, forces from all corners of the kingdom. They marched towards the capital. Kyle's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing like the eye of a storm. How many? He demanded, his voice a low growl. Thousands, my king, the rider replied. The rebellion has united under a new leader, someone with considerable influence. We've never seen this kind of unity before. Nera's eyes glinted with the fierce light of determination. Then it's time we show them the full power of Inferna. We'll meet them head on. Kyle turned to the rider, his voice commanding. Prepare the army. We leave for the northern border at dawn. Tell the generals to ready themselves for a fight they will never forget. The rider bowed once more before rushing off to deliver the orders. Kale and Nera exchanged a knowing glance. The time for diplomacy had passed. Now, the flames of war would consume everything in their path. The day of battle arrived swiftly, the sky painted with shades of fiery red as the sun rose over the battlefield. The northern plains stretched before the Fire King's army, the ground scorched and cracked from the heat of the land. The army of rebels stood ready, their ranks far greater than Kale had anticipated, but none could compare to the might of the fire-wielding warriors who followed him. Kale stood at the front of his army, the obsidian staff gripped firmly in his hand. The ruby at its tip glowed with the intensity of his fury, his aura radiating heat that caused the air to shimmer and twist around him. Behind him, Nera stood poised, her eyes sharp and calculating. The wind whispered across the field, but it was drowned out by the sounds of war drums and battle cries. We will not retreat, Kale bellowed to his soldiers, his voice carrying across the ranks like thunder. Inferna will never kneel to those who think they can take what is ours. We fight as one. We fight for the fire that sustains us, for the kingdom that we've built. The soldiers erupted into cheers, their weapons raised high, the flames of their loyalty burning as brightly as the fires of war. But it was Nera who moved first. With a swift, graceful motion, she unsheathed her blade, a long, curved weapon forged from the heart of a volcano, and led the charge. Kale followed her, his power surging as he raised his staff. A wave of fire exploded from the ground, scorching the earth and sending the enemy forces scattering in terror. The fire bent to his will, an inferno unleashed with a single command. The battle was fierce and swift. The rebels, though numerous, were no match for the fiery wrath of the Fire King and his queen. Kyle's warriors cut through their ranks with brutal precision, flames licking the air as their enemies crumbled under the weight of their might. Nera moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, her every strike precise, her movements a blur as she tore through the ranks of the rebels with deadly grace. But as the battle raged on, Cale's mind remained focused. He knew that this was only the beginning. The true leader of the rebellion had yet to reveal himself, and Coil could sense the presence of someone powerful, someone who sought to challenge his rule. Through the chaos of the battlefield, a lone figure emerged, tall, cloaked in shadow, and radiating an energy unlike anything Cale had ever felt. The figure's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating light, and Cale felt the temperature drop as he approached. "Who dares to face me?" Cale called, his voice echoing across the field. His heart burned with anticipation. The figure stepped forward, revealing a man clad in dark armor, his face hidden beneath a hood. "I am the one who will bring the Fire King to his knees," the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. Kyle's grip on his staff tightened, and the flames around him grew hotter. This was no ordinary rebel leader. This was someone who had the audacity to challenge the very essence of his power. The Fire King was ready for the battle that would decide not only the fate of his kingdom, but his very legacy. Chapter 3. The Battle for Inferna. The figure that stood before Coil was unlike any enemy he had ever faced. The man was tall, his silhouette framed by the dark, tattered cloak that fluttered in the burning winds of the battlefield. His presence seemed to suffocate the air around him, a cold energy that stood in stark contrast to the scorching heat Kyle and his kingdom embodied. The rebel leader's eyes gleamed like two icy flames, cold and unyielding, as he slowly raised his hand to reveal a dark sigil burned into the back of his palm, a symbol Cale knew all too well. It was a mark of an ancient order, the Ashborn. Cale's chest tightened, his amber eyes narrowing with recognition. The Ashborn had long been a faction shrouded in mystery, an ancient group of elemental outcasts who had been exiled from the world long before the rise of the Fire Kingdom. They wielded a forbidden form of magic, one that could snuff out flames and manipulate the very essence of darkness. They were enemies from the past, but they had been thought to be extinct. Until now. "Who are you?" Cale's voice echoed across the battlefield, his grip on his obsidian staff tightening. The air around him shimmered with heat, the ground beneath him cracking as his power surged, but the figure before him remained unmoved, unfazed by the firestorm Cale conjured around him. "I am Nox," the figure spoke, his voice low and cutting like the wind itself. "The last of the Ashborn, and I will be the one to put an end to your reign." Nira, who had been cutting through enemy ranks with her blade, turned at the sound of the name. She recognized it as well. The Ashborn were not mere rebels. They were the harbingers of the end, capable of extinguishing the very flame that had built the kingdom of Inferna. Nira's grip on her sword tightened, her molten eyes locking onto Nox. "You think you can extinguish the fire?" Nira's voice was like a storm, powerful and defiant. "You're a fool if you believe that." Nox's lips twisted into a cold, humorless smile. "I don't need to extinguish your flames. I only need to weaken you." Without warning, Nox raised both hands, and the very ground beneath them trembled. A dark wave of energy emanated from his body, spreading like an insidious fog that wrapped around Coil and Nira. The heat in the air began to drop, the fire surrounding them flickering and sputtering. The temperature plummeted, and Coil could feel his control over the flames slipping. He roared, summoning the full force of his power, But the darkness of Nox's magic met him head-on, pushing against the inferno with unnatural force. It was as if the air itself had turned cold, suffocating the fire within him. "Nox!" Kyle shouted, his voice burning with fury. "You dare challenge me?" Nox stood, unfazed, his eyes glowing with the dark magic he wielded. "I don't just challenge you, Kyle," he said, his voice like the whisper of a dying ember. "I will unmake everything you've built. You and your fire are nothing but a temporary force, a fleeting spark in the grand design of the world." The flames around Kyle faltered, the fire that was his domain flickering and dimming under the weight of Nox's magic. He could feel his strength waning, and for the first time he understood the true power of the Ashborn. Nira stepped forward, her fierce eyes glowing with determination. "Kale, we need to fight fire with fire. We cannot let this darkness take us." Kyle nodded, his mind racing. He knew that the only way to stop Nox was to push past the limitations of his own powers. He had always ruled through brute force and the fire that burned within him. But now he realized that he would need to tap into something deeper, something older than the flame itself. As he reached out with his mind, Kyle could feel the very pulse of Inferna beneath his feet, the heartbeat of his kingdom, the foundation that had supported him for so long. It was a power not just of flame, but of life itself, and he would use it. With a mighty roar, Kyle slammed his staff into the ground, and the earth beneath him cracked open. Lava erupted from the fissures, surging up like a torrent of molten fury. The firestorm around him raged back to life, roaring louder than ever before, the flames twisting and thrashing with newfound intensity. The power of the earth, the fire, and the kingdom itself surged through him. "Nira, now!" Kyle shouted. Nira reacted immediately. Her blade, infused with the raw heat of the kingdom, glowed like the sun. With a swift motion, she charged forward, cutting through the air with incredible speed. Her sword met Nox's dark energy head-on, clashing with an explosion of power that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, fire and darkness locked in a fierce struggle for dominance. But as the power of the kingdom surged within Kale, he could feel the darkness beginning to falter, the shadows recoiling as his flames overpowered Nox's magic. The ground beneath them began to tremble again, this time from the weight of Kale's fury. Nox stumbled back, his power beginning to wane in the face of the firestorm Kale had unleashed. The Ashborn had underestimated the strength of the Fire King, the bond between Kale and his kingdom. They had underestimated the heart of the flame. "You cannot win," Kale said, his voice deep and commanding. "Inferna will never fall to you." With a final cry of defiance, Kale unleashed the full force of his power, sending a tidal wave of flame crashing toward Nox. The dark magic met the inferno head-on, but it was no match for the fire that had shaped Kale's very soul. Nox's cry was swallowed by the flames as the darkness dissipated, and the battlefield erupted in a final blaze of heat and light. The rebels, once emboldened by their leader's strength, faltered in the wake of the Fire King's fury. They scattered, defeated, their forces broken in the face of the true power of Inferna. As the flames finally began to subside, Kyle and Nira stood together amidst the wreckage, their clothes singed, their bodies scarred but unbroken. The rebellion was over. The Ashborn were no more. But Kale knew that this victory was only the beginning. "The fire will always burn," Kale said, his voice low but filled with certainty, "and nothing will ever extinguish it." Nera nodded, her eyes filled with the same fierce resolve. Together we are unstoppable. As they looked over the smoldering battlefield, they knew that their reign had been tested, but they had proven that nothing, not even the darkness, could ever destroy the kingdom of Inferna. Chapter 4. The Legacy of Flame. The winds over the battlefield had calmed, and the smoke of battle hung in the air like a heavy shroud. The once chaotic sounds of war had quieted, leaving only the distant crackle of burning remnants of the rebellion. The earth, still scorched from the aftermath of Kyle's fury, bore the marks of their fight, a battle that had determined the fate of Inferna. Kyle stood at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. His body ached from the battle, but it was a familiar pain, a reminder that he had fought for what mattered most, his kingdom. The Ashborn were defeated, their rebellion crushed under the weight of the fire and earth that fueled his power. Yet, as the flames settled and the last embers flickered out, Kyle could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. He turned toward Nyra, who stood by his side, her blade still in hand, her expression unreadable. The fierceness that had driven them both throughout the battle had now given way to a quiet reflection. "Do you feel it?" Kale asked, his voice heavy with the weight of his thoughts. Nyra's amber eyes met his, her gaze sharp and knowing. "Yes," she said quietly. "The battle is won, but the war has only just begun." Kyle nodded, understanding what she meant. While the Ashborn were gone, the rebellion had been a symptom of something much larger. The people of Inferna had always followed Kale and Nyra out of respect, fear, and love. But now they would be forced to rebuild. Trust would have to be earned, and the scars of battle would take time to heal. More than that, the underlying unrest that had fueled the rebellion still lingered in the hearts of the people. "We will rebuild," Kyle said firmly, his voice resolute, "and we will make sure that no one can threaten our kingdom again." But Nyra's gaze did not soften. "It's not just about rebuilding the kingdom, Kyle. We need to rebuild the faith of the people. Our reign has been tested, but they are not all like the soldiers who fought for us. There are those who doubt, who fear the fire." Kyle's jaw clenched, his grip tightening around his staff. He had always believed in the strength of his people, the power that came from the fire that flowed through their veins. But he knew that Nyra was right. The flames of war had a way of consuming more than just the battlefield. They left behind doubt, fear, and destruction. "We will show them that the fire is not their enemy," Kale said with conviction. "The fire is life. It gives us strength, purpose, and the power to protect. We will reignite their belief in us." Nyra's lips curled into a small smile, her confidence unwavering. "You know I will stand by you, Kyle. Together we can do anything." As the two of them stood together on the scorched earth, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the landscape. The flames of the day had finally faded, but the fire in Kale's heart still burned brightly. The next few days were filled with swift action. Kale and Nyra oversaw the rebuilding of the kingdom, ensuring that the people knew their rulers were not only strong, but compassionate. They visited the towns and villages that had been affected by the rebellion, offering both aid and a promise of a new beginning. The flames of war had scorched their land, but it was also the fire that would forge them into something greater. Nyra, with her natural grace and strength, took charge of uniting the leaders of the surrounding territories, ensuring that no unrest would linger in the hearts of the people. She was a symbol of the kingdom's unwavering resolve, and her presence calmed the fears of those who had doubted their rulers. Meanwhile, Kyle focused on the warriors, the soldiers who had fought beside him on the battlefield. He knew that they were his true strength. They had given their all to defend Inferna, and it was time to remind them why they fought. The bond between Kyle and his army was one of fire, but also of loyalty and love for their kingdom. He needed to show them that the fire they followed was not only for destruction, but also for creation, for rebirth. As the weeks passed, the kingdom began to heal. The scars of war were still present, but Kale and Nira's determination to rebuild and restore the kingdom of Inferna was unwavering. The fires that had once threatened to consume everything now became the symbol of their resilience. Inferna had been tested, but it had not fallen. Instead, it rose from the ashes stronger and more united than ever before. One evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Kyle and Nira stood side by side once again. The kingdom stretched out before them, a land reborn from the trials of war. The city of Inferna, with its towers of flame and stone, glowed like a beacon in the night. The fire had not only survived, but it had thrived. Kyle turned to Nira, his amber eyes reflecting the burning light of the city. "We've done it," he said softly, his voice filled with both pride and relief. Nira smiled, her amber eyes warm with affection. "We've done it together." Kyle reached out and took her hand, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they had emerged victorious. The legacy of Inferna would not be one of destruction, but one of strength, unity, and the fire that had given them everything. The fire would always burn, and as long as Kyle and Nira stood together, it would never be extinguished. Chapter 5. The Eternal Flame. Months passed since the rebellion had been quelled, and the fires of war had been extinguished. Yet the legacy of Kale and Nira's reign was far from fading. Inferna was no longer just a kingdom of flames. It had become a symbol of resilience, rebirth, and unity. The people, once fractured and fearful, now stood tall under the rule of their fiery monarchs, their hearts ignited by the example set by their rulers. But peace, Kale had learned, was never permanent. It had to be earned, protected, and renewed with every passing day. In the grand hall of the palace, the warmth of the hearth fire danced in the air, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Kyle and Nira sat side by side, their hands intertwined, discussing the future of their kingdom. Despite the calm that had settled over Inferna, Kale knew that challenges still lay ahead. Their reign had been hard won, and even though the kingdom was stronger than ever, there were whispers of distant threats beyond their borders. "I can feel it," Nira said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, but filled with the conviction that Kyle had always admired. "There are stirrings in the east. A new enemy may rise to challenge us." Kyle's amber eyes darkened. He had suspected as much. The winds of war often blew from the horizon, and even though Inferna's enemies had been crushed, there would always be those who sought to test their strength. Still, Kyle knew one thing. They had forged a kingdom from fire, and it was not one that could be easily torn apart. "I've heard the same," Kyle replied, his voice steady. "But we are ready. Our soldiers are strong. our people united. We will face whatever comes with the same fire that has brought us here. Naira's eyes glinted with approval. We've faced the darkness before, Kyle. Together, we can face anything. As they sat in the warmth of the palace, a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent. The man bowed before them, his face pale with concern. "Your Majesties," he said, "there is a disturbance at the borders. Strange fires have been spotted, but they do not resemble anything we have seen before. It is unlike any magic known to us." Kyle stood immediately, the weight of the messenger's words settling over him like a cold shadow. Strange fires? Something foreign, something beyond their understanding, was threatening their kingdom. Kyle's chest tightened as he turned to Naira. "We must go," Kyle said, his voice hard. "We will meet this threat head on." The two of them quickly gathered their most trusted soldiers, and, in a matter of hours, they stood on the edge of the kingdom, looking out over the horizon. The sun had just dipped below the line of mountains, casting the sky in a deep red. Far in the distance, they could see the flickering glow of fire on the wind, unnatural, as though the flames themselves were alive, moving and dancing in ways that no flame should. As Kyle's heart pounded, he could feel the power of Inferno within him, the fire that ran through his veins, steady and unyielding. But as he approached the borders, he sensed a presence, dark, oppressive. It was not the heat of the flames, but something much colder, much older. His grip on his staff tightened. Naira, ever the perceptive one, glanced at Kyle with a knowing look. "This is no ordinary fire," she said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and concern. "There is something else at play here." The strange fires were growing closer, and as they advanced, the air around them grew colder, the heat from their own flames being slowly sapped away. The closer they got, the more oppressive the darkness became. Kyle could feel the very land beneath them shaking, as though the earth itself was reacting to the invasion. And then, as they reached the heart of the disturbance, they saw it. A massive figure stood before them, shrouded in the eerie glow of the unnatural flames. The creature was enormous, its body composed of blackened stone and shadow, with eyes glowing an unholy red. Its arms were like massive pillars, and the ground beneath its feet trembled with each step it took. "I am Zalarath," the creature spoke, its voice deep and resonating like a crack of thunder. "The eternal flame of destruction. I have come to claim what is mine." Kyle's heart froze. He knew this name. Zalarath was a legend, an ancient being spoken of in whispered tales. A creature of flame and shadow, said to be born in the heart of the void, older than any mortal kingdom. It was said that Zalarath was a force of pure destruction, a being who could turn the greatest flames into dust, whose power was enough to undo entire civilizations. Naira stepped forward, her posture defiant. "We will not yield," she declared, her voice filled with strength. "Inferna will never fall to you." Zalarath's laugh echoed through the air, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "You misunderstand," he said. "I do not seek to destroy Inferna. I seek to claim it, to take its fire and make it my own." Kyle's grip on his staff tightened. "You may think you can control fire, but you are wrong. Fire is not something to be owned. It is a force, a living, breathing thing that can never be controlled by any one being." Zalarath's eyes glowed brighter, and the ground beneath them cracked open, releasing waves of dark flame. The air around them pulsed with malevolent energy, but Kyle and Nera stood firm. They had faced great dangers before, and they would not falter now. Kyle raised his staff, calling upon the flames of Inferna. The air around him grew hotter, the fire roaring to life as it surged from the ground beneath his feet. Nera, too, called upon her strength, her sword glowing like molten steel. Together, they would face this ancient threat with the full force of their power. Zalarath's dark flames collided with their light, creating a violent explosion that lit up the night sky. The battle for Inferna had begun. Chapter 6: The Battle of Eternal Flames. The skies above Inferna were no longer the calm shade of twilight. Instead, they were torn asunder by the violent clash of fire and darkness. Zalarath, a being of ancient and malevolent flame, towered over Kale and Nera, his very presence distorting the air around them. The ground trembled with the force of his dark powers, and the unnatural fires that surrounded him sent waves of heat and cold, unsettling the elements themselves. Kyle's heart beat loudly in his chest, not from fear, but from the fierce determination that surged within him. He had always known that Inferna's fire would be tested, but he had never imagined facing such a force. Something born from the heart of the void, something older than any kingdom or civilization. Zalarath's power was immense, but so was Kale's resolve. Nera, standing by his side, radiated strength. Her amber eyes burned with the fire of battle, her sword gleaming with molten brilliance. She was every bit as fierce as the flames they both commanded. Kale felt the connection between them, the bond that had grown through every trial they had faced together. Now it would be tested like never before. "You are fools to think you can stand against me," Zalarath's voice thundered, each word vibrating the very earth beneath their feet. "Inferna's flames will bow to me, and I will consume them." Kyle's lips curled into a defiant smile. "You are wrong, Zalarath. Flames do not bow to anyone. They burn, they live, and they will never be controlled by you." With a fierce roar, Kyle raised his staff high, and the ground beneath them rumbled as the fires of Inferna surged to life. The flames roared with an intensity that matched the fury in his heart. They whipped around him, swirling like a vortex, as Kyle channeled every ounce of his power into the attack. The fire of Inferna, the fire of his kingdom, his people, and his very soul surged forth, colliding with Zalarath's dark flames in a cataclysmic explosion. The shockwaves sent both Kale and Nera staggering backward, but they quickly regained their footing, standing firm as the fiery chaos raged around them. Zalarath's dark flames twisted and writhed, like serpents seeking to devour everything in their path. But Kyle's flames, the wild and untamed, burned with purpose. "Is this all you can do?" Zalarath sneered, his eyes glowing like embers in a dying fire. "You cannot defeat me. I am the eternal flame, the harbinger of destruction." Nera, her expression fierce, stepped forward, her sword held high. "The fire that you claim to control is not yours," she declared. "It is the flame of life, of rebirth, and it will never be extinguished by the likes of you." With a cry of battle, she charged forward, her sword cutting through the air in a blinding arc of molten steel. Zalarath's dark flames met her strike with a terrible force, but Nera's strength was unmatched. Her blade cleaved through the darkness, and with a surge of power, she struck at Zalarath's core. The force of the blow sent ripples through the battlefield, but Zalarath merely laughed, his massive form unyielding. "You cannot harm me," he boomed. "I am beyond your reach." But Kyle knew that the battle was not won through brute force alone. It was about the heart of the fire, the very essence of Inferna. He could feel it pulsing through the land, through the flames that burned beneath his feet. With a deep breath, he gathered his strength, summoning every ounce of power within him. Together, Kyle and Nyra raised their hands toward the heavens, calling upon the pure, untamed fire that flowed through them both. The flames around them swirled higher, building into a towering inferno that stretched toward the sky. It was a fire like no other. Its heat was both searing and soothing, its light both blinding and comforting. "This is the true fire," Kyle said, his voice steady. "This is the fire that burns with purpose, with love, with life." The flames surged forward, enveloping Zalarath in a storm of fiery light. The dark creatures screamed as the purity of Inferna's fire clashed against the darkness within him. Zalarath's form began to flicker and distort, his fiery essence unraveling in the face of the true flame. "No!" Zalarath howled, his massive form cracking and breaking under the pressure of the onslaught. This cannot be. But it was too late. The fire of Inferna, the fire of life, consumed Zalarath entirely, reducing him to nothing more than a pile of blackened ash. The dark flames that had once twisted and writhed around him faded, leaving only the pure, radiant fire of Inferna burning brightly in its place. As the last of the dark flames dissipated, Kyle and Nyra stood in the center of the battlefield, their bodies covered in ash and sweat, but their spirits unbroken. The fire that had once threatened to consume them had now burned away the darkness. "We did it," Nyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. Kyle turned to her, his amber eyes filled with pride. "We did it together." With a final look at the battlefield, they knew that the danger had passed, for now. But Kale also knew that the fire, both within and around them, would always be tested. Their kingdom was strong, but it was the people's belief in the flame, in each other, that would sustain them. Inferna would never fall. The flames of life would always burn brightly, and Kyle and Nyra, the rulers of the fire, would always stand together forever. Chapter 7. The Reign of the Flames, the aftermath of Zalarath's defeat, left a scar on the land, but it was not a wound that would last. Inferna, though ravaged by the dark flames, began to heal. The kingdom's people, weary from the battle, now returned to their lives, drawing strength from the resilience of their rulers. Kyle and Nyra stood at the heart of their kingdom, watching the restoration unfold before them. The flames of life once again filled the land. But peace was never to last long in a world shaped by fire. Weeks after the battle, strange occurrences began to unfold. The land seemed to tremble in the distance, as though the very earth itself was preparing for something greater. It started as a murmur, a whisper among the people, but soon it spread like wildfire. There were rumors of strange, fiery creatures appearing in the forests and on the borders, of fires burning without source, of ancient symbols being etched into the land in the dead of night. Kyle felt it first, the disturbance in the air, the flickering of energy he couldn't fully comprehend. It was not the same as the dark force Zalarath had brought, but it was powerful, almost as if a new flame had risen from the ashes of the old. He shared his concerns with Nyra, who was already attuned to the flow of the kingdom's fire. "Something is stirring," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It feels like the flame has changed. There is a new force growing." Kyle clenched his fists, the power of Infernus surging beneath his skin. I won't let anything threaten our people again, not after everything we've fought for. The couple set out to investigate the rumors, traveling to the distant borders where the strange occurrences had been most frequent. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the land, they came upon an eerie scene, a circle of fire, unlike anything they had seen before. The flames were not orange or red, but a dark purple, flickering with an ominous hue. The air around the fire felt charged, heavy with energy, as though it were drawing power from something ancient. Nera's sharp eyes scanned the area, her senses heightened. "This is not ordinary fire," she said, taking a step closer to the edge of the circle. "This is something older." Kyle nodded, his instincts telling him they were close to something they couldn't yet understand. He raised his staff, its glowing tip pointing toward the center of the circle. The flames flickered violently in response, as though recognizing the power in Kale's hands. From the depths of the fire, a voice boomed, a deep, reverberating sound that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. "Kyle of Inferna, Nera, the Flamebringer." The voice rumbled, the words carrying a weight of ancient power. "You have disrupted the balance. The flames were never meant to be controlled by one, not even by you." The fire in the circle began to churn, twisting and writhing like serpents, forming shapes that were almost recognizable, but constantly shifting, never fully solid. Kale stepped forward, his eyes locked on the source of the voice. "Who dares speak to us in such a way?" he demanded, his voice filled with authority. "We are the rulers of Inferna, and we will not be intimidated by mere flames." A figure emerged from the center of the fire, rising from the flames like a spirit summoned from the depths of the underworld. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that glowed with the same eerie purple light as the fire. It was a being unlike any Kyle and Nera had ever seen, a creature born from flame and shadow, its form ever changing, but its presence unmistakably powerful. "I am Pyrrhakul, the keeper of the eternal flame," the figure intoned, its voice still rumbling with ancient power. "I have watched the flames of Inferna for millennia, and now you have disturbed them. You have ignited a fire that cannot be controlled, a fire that will burn the world to ash." Kyle's heart pounded in his chest. Pyrrhakul was a being of legend, a force of nature that existed long before Inferna itself. It was said that Pyrrhakul was the guardian of the oldest flames, those that burned at the creation of the world. This creature had the power to destroy everything that Kale and Nera had fought to build. "You are mistaken," Kale replied, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We did not disturb the balance. We have simply learned to control the flame, to use it to protect, to create." Pyrrhakul's eyes narrowed, and the flames around it grew darker. "You have not learned control. You have learned only to wield power. But power, Kale of Inferna, is a dangerous thing. It cannot be tamed. It is a force that will consume you." Before Kale or Nera could respond, Pyrrhakul's form began to dissolve into the fire, merging with the flames in a terrifying display of power. The ground beneath them cracked open, and fire surged outward, encircling them like a cage. "You are not ready for the true fire," Pyrrhakul's voice echoed from within the flames. "And when the final flame consumes you, nothing will remain. The fire will burn all, even your kingdom." Kale's eyes widened, but his resolve remained unshaken. He felt the power of Inferna course through him, and he knew that this was not the end. It was a challenge, a test to see if their kingdom's flame could survive the trials that awaited. "We will face you, Pirkul," Kyle said, his voice filled with unwavering confidence. "Inferna will never fall. We will protect our kingdom, our people, and the fire that burns within us." As Pirkul's form retreated into the fire, the flames began to die down, but the sense of foreboding lingered in the air. The battle was not over. It was only just beginning. Kyle and Nira stood together, their hands clenched in determination. Whatever Pirkul had planned, they would face it as one. The fires of Inferna would not be extinguished, not while they still stood. Chapter 8. The Last Flame. The night air was thick with tension as Kyle and Nira stood side by side, gazing upon the horizon where the fires of Pirkul's darkness had once burned. The battle had only begun, but both rulers knew that the end would come soon. They could feel it, the weight of destiny, the weight of their flame, bearing down upon them with every step they took toward the final confrontation. The skies over Inferna had turned a deep shade of purple, a sign of the ancient force that had awakened. Pirkul's power had infected the very essence of the land, spreading corruption like wildfire, consuming everything it touched. But the flames of Inferna, the flames that had once been a symbol of life, now burned with a fury that was equal to that of their adversary. They would not allow Pirkul to claim the fire, not while they still had the strength to fight. "We've come too far to back down now," Nira said, her voice calm, yet filled with determination as she adjusted the hilt of her sword. The blade was still warm from the fires they had battled through, and she knew that it would need to burn even hotter in the days to come. Kyle nodded, his amber eyes flickering with the light of his own inner fire. Inferna is more than just a kingdom. It's a living force, a bond between every soul that walks within it. Pirkul may have power, but he does not understand what it truly means to command the flames. The two rulers walked toward the center of Inferna, where the heart of the kingdom lay, the legendary Firestone. The stone was said to hold the very essence of Inferna's flame, a source of power and life that had been passed down for generations. It was here that they would confront Pirkul, face to face, and here where the fate of the kingdom would be decided. As they approached the Firestone, the air grew heavy with energy. The flames around them crackled and sparked, reacting to the tension in the atmosphere. It was as though Inferna itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final clash between two unstoppable forces. The Firestone pulsed with a deep, rhythmic energy, casting flickering shadows across the ground. It was ancient, older than anything Kyle had ever encountered, and its glow was faint, as if it too had felt the corruption that Pirkul had spread. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and Pirkul's voice echoed through the air, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have come to face me, then, foolish mortals. You cannot hope to control the flame that was born before time itself. It belongs to me." The ground split open in front of them, and from the darkness emerged Pirkul, his form now even more terrifying than before. He was a towering presence of shadow and flame, his dark purple fire crackling with an unnatural energy. His eyes burned with the cold fire of the void, and his every movement sent shivers through the land. "You will not control the fire, Pirkul," Kyle shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. Inferna's flame is not meant to be a weapon. It is meant to bring life, to protect, and to create. You do not understand what it means to protect. Pirkul laughed, a sound like thunder crashing across the heavens. Protect? You have no idea what true power is. You have merely scratched the surface of the flame. You are playing with forces you do not comprehend. Kyle's heart burned with rage, but he knew that his anger alone would not defeat Pirkul. He needed to be more than just a ruler. He needed to be a protector. He needed to embody the very essence of Inferna itself, the eternal flame that burned not for destruction, but for life. With a deep breath, Kyle raised his staff, and Nira stepped forward, her sword raised high. Together, they summoned the full power of Inferna, the fire that had shaped their world, the fire that had kept their people alive for centuries. The flames around them roared to life, a dazzling, brilliant inferno that consumed the air and lit the sky. But this time, the flames were not merely a weapon, they were a force of creation. The fire that had once been wild and untamed now flowed with purpose, its light blinding and pure. Pirkul's eyes widened as the flames closed in on him. "No, this is impossible," he bellowed, but the fire consumed him all the same. The battle raged as Kyle and Nira channeled the full power of Inferna's flame, fighting not only to destroy Pirkul, but to restore the balance that had been disrupted. Their flames clashed with Pirkul's dark fire, the two powers colliding in an explosion of light and shadow. As the battle reached its climax, Kyle understood the truth. Pirkul's fire had always been one of destruction. It was a fire born of darkness, a fire that sought to consume everything. But the fire of Inferna was different. It was a fire of life, of creation, a fire that could burn and yet never be exhausted. With a final powerful surge of energy, Kyle and Nira combined their flames, directing the full force of Inferna into Pirkul. The dark fire twisted and screamed in protest, but it was no match for the purity and power of the fire that Kyle and Nira commanded. The explosion of light was blinding, and for a moment everything was silent. Then, as the light began to fade, Kale and Nira stood, their clothes singed, their bodies bruised, but their spirits unbroken. The flames around them began to settle, and the corrupted fires that had once threatened their kingdom flickered out. Pirkul's form lay in ashes at their feet, his dark fire extinguished by the light of Inferna's eternal flame. "We did it," Nira whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Kyle nodded, his heart still racing from the battle. "Inferna will never fall, as long as we protect it, as long as we stand together. The flame will always burn." And so, with Pirkul vanquished, the kingdom of Inferna began to heal once more. The flames of life returned to their rightful place, and Kale and Nira ruled, not just as king and queen, but as the embodiment of the eternal fire, protectors of the flame, defenders of their people, and the last of the true fire-bearers. Together, they would keep the flames alive forever.